Hey there, I'm RJ, and I wanted to do another video book review because I did one for The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and I referenced Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, or yes, Zevin. I keep saying Zelvin, but that's just can't read. um, but I hadn't actually posted my review of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow yet, so I wanted to record that review. This was the longest one I had written prior to The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, so I had a lot to say about it. And I know a lot of people love this book, but I kind of had a middling review of it, unfortunately. So I had very complicated feelings. I did enjoy it, and I listened to the audiobook on Spotify, which is why I don't have a physical copy with me. And I thought the audiobook narrator was really good. There's one chapter from a different narrator, and he was also very good. So there's no problems with that, but I couldn't help but compare it to The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, as I had so recently read that book. And it really was just a worse version of that book, unfortunately. It takes a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same storytelling mechanisms and just doesn't execute them as well. So they have two codependent people making an art project together at the dawn of a given era. So in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, that's video games. But Cavalier and Clay is a generational classic in a lot of ways. So I tried to push those comparisons aside to give Tomorrow 3, as I dubbed it in my text chats, to not have to say the whole title every single time, a fair shake, but it had some pretty glaring flaws. So this one's definitely going to have some spoilers in it, so keep that in mind. So what I enjoyed was the format of the book. I thought it was really good, framing each section of the book with the video game title that the main characters were working on at the time. Those are Sam and Sadie. Occasionally, there would be jumps forward in time to show that events would become reframed over the course of their careers, saying things like, in an interview with some magazine, I'm not pulling any direct quote here, in 2017, Sam said, blah, 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 and so on. Those were also things that happened in Cavalier and Clay as well. Not in 2017, mostly like the 80s, 90s, but that was something that they did as well. I thought it was a good addition to help the themes of how memory in the intervening years can help reshape the telling of events. At times, however, I think it gave us too much about the information. She's just telling us in one of these moments that Sam and Sadie hadn't spoken in years at the point of a future event, which tells us there's going to be a period of separation. And some people talk about the book as the characters like coming apart and coming together, but there's only really one coming apart, and then the later one that you end up realizing happens because they kind of spoil it in the book itself. They meet as children, they don't speak for many years until they meet again in university, and then they don't have really any sort of meaningful period of separation after that until much later on. Even though there's about to be more bad on this list, I did enjoy the experience of reading the book overall. I recommended it to people already, and I don't regret that I did so before finishing the book. Even after finishing the book and having a sort of middling view of it, there's definitely people I think this book is for. And especially with the themes of video games, that sets it apart from Cavalier and Clay, which is about comic books. There are differences there in how it tackles the artistry and creative element in that. It's definitely a good book for someone who grew up with video games and wants an engaging historical fiction thing about that. So they kind of serve two different audiences in that way, even though there is obviously a huge overlap in video game people and comic people. So for the bad, as I said, it is a slightly worse version of The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. And even putting that aside, the book felt overall as if it needed another edit. In the first 50% of the book, we randomly get sections from Sam's dead mother's POV that I felt didn't really add anything to the book. While we aren't explicitly told that she's dead before the end of those flashbacks, it's pretty clear that she must be because she just doesn't appear and he doesn't talk about her, whereas he talks about calling his grandparents all the time. And it's sad enough that he has a dead mom without having to see her point of view of the events that lead up to her death. The handful of flashbacks mostly contain things that Sam doesn't even know about and never learns about, so they don't really explain anything about the book or about Sam's motivations to me. He doesn't know about some of the darker realities of her career, of her life, things like that. And so it doesn't really inform the way that he acts. I think it was meant to underscore the theme of first generational immigrant experience or of the general tragedy of life, but it didn't do so effectively enough, and I think the book would have been better without those sections. Later, when there's an incident of gun violence in the book, I felt the way that it was written was very now, 2022, of the time the book was released. I read it in 2025, and not very 2005 when the event takes place. Overall, the book had an air of a 2022 writing the 90s and early 2000s rather than a normal historical fiction book, even considering the future moments where we get like quotes from 2017 and so on. The anachronistic moments occasionally took me out of that reading experience. So, for example, with the treatment of gun violence in the book, it was just very 2005. The culture around those sorts of incidences was very different 20 years ago than it is today, and 2022 is not that different from how it is in 2025. So that would just felt a little bit weird. The themes that are brought up in the book, such as race, gender, and disability being major ones, aren't well enough explored for my liking and are just sort of left in front of the reader, like, see, I can include complex topics, rather than actually doing anything particularly interesting with them. They're just sort of thrown in front of you about, like, Sadie being a woman in the industry, and then it sort of dropped. Sam is also disabled. He has issues with his foot, which is later amputated at one point, and then has issues with that process as well. And the way that it's dealt with in the book just feels like they're saying it to say it rather than having it inform any sort of meaningful aspect of his character. So, my final thoughts on Tomorrow is that it's a good book, but it could have used another editorial pass. Despite my seemingly negative review, I would actually recommend this to video game lovers and people who are looking for something a little bit different within the historical fiction realm. So hopefully you have gotten something interesting from that review, whether that makes you want to read the book or makes you sure that it's a pass for you. Let me know down below. Have you read Tomorrow? And what did you think about it? Have a good day.